Good evening. My name is Jackie Kemp, and I'm presenting Scotland at 7 this evening. I'm a journalist and have a Substack. Um, Ukraine update, day 818. Humanitarian aid to Ukraine is facing a significant decline just when it needs more support, warns the UN Refugee Agency, the UNHCR. Carolina Lindholm Billing, the agency's representative in Ukraine, highlighted the criticism, noting that the 4 million people displaced and include some very vulnerable individuals. The UN's humanitarian plan for Ukraine in 2024 amounts to $3 billion, with 600 million allocated specifically for the UNHCR. However, funding for both the Global Response Plan and the UNHCR appeal has been alarmingly low in the first quarter of this year. Only about 15% of the necessary funds were secured, compared to about 30% during the same period last year, according to Lindholm Billing. The significant drop in funding poses a severe challenge to providing adequate support to those in dire need in Ukraine. The situation calls for urgent attention and increased contributions from the international community to meet the escalating humanitarian demands. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has proposed that NATO forces from neighbouring intercept incoming Russian missiles over Ukraine. Speaking to Reuters, President Zelensky emphasized the urgent need for air support, stating that Russia is deploying around 300 planes in Ukrainian airspace. To counter this, Ukraine needs at least 130 planes. While awaiting the delivery of F-16 fighter jets, Zelensky suggested NATO countries could fly these jets from neighbouring states and intercept Russian missiles. This would significantly strengthen Ukraine's defence capabilities. Zelensky also revealed ongoing negotiations with international partners to use their weapons against Russian military hardware at the border and within Russian territory. However, there has been no positive outcome so far. He reiterated Ukraine's commitment to not using Allied weapons inside Russia to avoid escalation. Lithuanian Foreign Minister Elias Landsbergis has called for lifting these restrictions. He argues that limiting Ukraine's use of provided equipment only benefits Russia. Landsbergis stressed that Ukraine must be allowed to use these weapons to achieve strategic objectives, including striking Russian territory and supply lines. Landsbergis also urged the return of Western military trainers to Ukraine to expedite the training of new forces. He suggested Lithuania is ready to join a coalition, possibly led by France, to train Ukrainian soldiers within Ukraine. He also proposed that France could deploy anti-aircraft defence elements in the Baltic states and encourage other allies to do the same. President Zelensky described the current battlefield situation as one of the most challenging since Russia's first full-scale invasion in February 22. Intense fighting continues in the Donbas region, but the situation north of Kharkiv is now under control. Israel-Gaza latest. The UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has criticised the request by ICC Chief Prosecutor Karim Khan for arrest warrants against Israel and Hamas leaders. Sunak described the move as deeply unhelpful and stated it would not aid in securing a pause in fighting or the release of hostages. The Board of Deputies of British Jews also condemned the ICC's decision, calling it an unacceptable attempt at moral equivalence between the two parties. They argue that ICC prosecutors' application unfairly equates Hamas, responsible for the October 7 mass terror attacks, with Israel, which is attempting to eliminate Hamas from Gaza. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Defense Minister Yoav Gallant are accused of severe war crimes, including extermination and the deliberate targeting of civilians. Similarly, Hamas leaders Yahya Sinwar, Mohammed Deif, and Ismail Haniyeh are wanted for crimes including murder, hostage, and torture. A report from Lorenzo Tondo and Quique Kirzenbaum in Jerusalem for The Guardian reveals troubling allegations about the interception of aid trucks delivering vital supplies to Gaza. According to multiple sources, individual members of Israel's security forces have been tipping off far-right activists and settlers about the location of these aid convoys. Settlers have been intercepting and vandalizing these vital humanitarian supplies, with information reportedly provided by members of the Israeli police and military. A spokesperson from the main Israeli activist group behind the blockades confirmed these claims to The Guardian. The Guardian reviewed messages from internal internet chat groups and accounts from witnesses and human rights activists supporting the allegation of collusion by security forces. Those blocking the vehicles argue that the aid is being diverted by Hamas instead of reaching civilians in need, a claim that relief agencies reject. Videos last week showed aid convoys being blocked and vandalized by Israeli settlers at the Tarkimaya checkpoint west of Hebron in the Israeli-occupied West Bank. Activists were seen throwing boxes of supplies to the ground. The White House condemned the attack, calling it utterly unacceptable behaviour. The situation in Gaza remains critical as Israeli ground operations continue, particularly in the northern area of Rafah. Israeli troops are meeting significant resistance from Hamas fighters. Despite international calls for a ceasefire, the conflict intensifies, leading to severe humanitarian consequences. The UN and other aid organizations have criticized Israel's temporary aid corridors as inadequate. Gaza's infrastructure has been heavily damaged, leaving the population in desperate need of assistance. The international community continues to call for a ceasefire and increased humanitarian support. Now we'll move on to UK news. Blood scandal. Earlier today, the First Minister John Swinney addressed the Scottish Parliament, welcoming the report released yesterday and paying tribute to all those infected and affected by the blood scandal. The First Minister opened his statement by expressing his profound disappointment, stating, "It's a disgrace that those who've been affected have had to work so hard to achieve the outcome that was achieved yesterday." The report provides damning reading for governments, the NHS and others responsible for patient safety across the UK during the scandal. Swinney highlighted the allegations of deception and of hiding the truth are deeply alarming. He noted that 3,000 families in Scotland have faced decades of unnecessary heartache and pain. The report states that both governments and the health service failed individuals with bleeding disorders and those who were transfused. Swinney added, "On behalf of the Scottish Government and as First Minister of Scotland, I apologise unreservedly to everyone who's been affected in any way by these events." Swinney acknowledged and welcomed the apology from Prime Minister Rishi Sunak yesterday and supported two solemn promises. Firstly, comprehensive compensation would be paid to both the infected and the affected. Secondly, a fundamental rebalancing of the system would be required in considering the recommendations. Swinney stated that the Scottish Government would collaborate with the UK Government on compensation and take necessary steps to rebalance the system. Swinney paid tribute to Bill Wright, who contracted Hep C from contaminated blood products and has campaigned tirelessly for justice on behalf of Haemophilia Scotland. Swinney committed to working alongside the UK Government to ensure that the families of victims receive compensation payments as quickly as possible. Swinney's expressed strong support for these measures, underscoring the need for collaboration between the Scottish and UK governments. He's urged the government to expedite the implementation of the Victim and Prisoners Bill, which will facilitate the distribution of compensation. Bill Wright, a prominent campaigner who had contracted Hep C from contaminated blood products, has been a central figure in the fight for justice. His efforts, alongside many others, have been crucial in bringing this issue to light and pushing for necessary change. The Scottish Government remains committed to ensuring that all affected families receive their due compensation as promptly as possible. They are working closely with the UK Government to streamline the process and address bureaucratic hurdles. This comprehensive approach not only aims to provide immediate relief, but also to rebuild trust in the healthcare system and ensure that such a tragedy is never repeated. The commitment to a just and fair resolution is a testament to the resilience and perseverance of the affected individuals and their families. Infected blood scandal compensation announcement. The UK Government has announced a multi-billion compensation scheme for victims of the infected blood scandal and their families. Cabinet Office Minister John Glenn detailed the compensation payment plan in Parliament. Glenn reiterated Sunak's apology and announced that Sir Robert Francis, who authored the report on compensation, will serve as interim chair of the new Infected Blood Compensation Authority. Acknowledging the urgency, Glenn noted that people are still dying each week from their infections. To address this, he announced immediate payments of $210,000 to living infected beneficiaries within 90 days. Glenn assured, if you have been directly or indirectly affected by NHS blood products or blood or tissue contaminated with HIV or Hep C, you will be eligible to claim compensation. Compensation will also be extended to the estates of deceased victims. Glenn emphasised, it's not just the harm caused by the infections that requires compensation, but also the wrong suffered by those affected. Affected loved ones, including parents, partners, siblings, and carers, will be applied. While the appointment of Robert Francis was welcomed, campaigners expressed concern over delays in interim payments to bereaved relatives. Jason Evans of the Factor 8 campaign group highlighted the disparity of compensation received by different estates. The government aims to finalise the compensation scheme with input from the infected blood community. All payments will be exempt from taxes and means test benefits assessments. Glenn stated that the goal is to begin final payments before the end of the year, addressing both the physical and mental impact on victims. The UK's offshore energy transition. A study from Robert Gordon University has found that the UK will fail to achieve a just and fair transition by 2030 without urgent political alignment to sustain offshore energy jobs and investment. Experts analysed over 6,500 scenarios for the industry and concluded that political decisions, not market forces, will determine the workforce size. Shockingly, less than 0.3% of these scenarios could be considered as a just and fair transition. Professor Paul DeLue highlighted that Scotland, particularly Aberdeen, would be disproportionately affected due to its high concentration of offshore jobs. To maintain the current workforce of over 150,000 by 2030, the installation of new offshore turbines needs to increase to roughly one per day. Additionally, the UK must continue extracting about 500,000 barrels of oil equivalent per day. The total installed capacity of offshore wind generation needs to jump from 15 gigawatts at the end of 2023 to around 40 gigawatts by 2030. Professor DeLue emphasised the importance of repurposing the North Sea into a multi-energy basin to secure the UK's energy future. He stated, the prize for the UK to get this right is enormous, but it requires urgent action, faster planning, and consenting access to the grid. Stephen Flynn, SNP Westminster leader, responded to the report by stressing the urgency of political alignment. He warned that without decisive action, 100,000 jobs could be at risk, criticising Labour's plans as potentially disastrous. Flynn stated, we need to be driving investment in our energy industry to secure the workforce and supply chain of tomorrow. But I fear that time is running out and we're losing that battle in London. Flynn called for increased investment in the energy sector to secure future jobs and the supply chain, cautioning that time is running out and the UK is losing the battle in London. Scotland's budget challenges. Scotland's top civil servant, Permanent Secretary John Paul Marks, has described this year's budget setting process as one of the hardest experiences of prioritisation since devolution. His comments come amid significant financial pressure facing the Scottish Government. Early today, Finance Secretary Shona Robinson confirmed that the publication of the government's medium-term financial strategy and tax plans would be delayed until June 20 due to the recent change in First Minister. Mr Marks appeared before the Finance and Public Administration Committee on Tuesday for his annual wide-ranging evidence session. He highlighted the financial strain that has impacted recent budgets, with the Scottish Fiscal Commission previously warning of a potential $1 billion deficit by the end of this year and $1.9 billion by 2027-28 if changes are not implemented. To address a $1.5 billion gap this year, the former administration under First Minister Humza Yousaf implemented a shift in tax policy. However, it remains unclear how this will affect future budgets. During the session, Scottish Labour MSP Michael Mara questioned Mr Marks on whether he has communicated the need for significant spending reductions to First Minister John Swinney. Mr Marks confirmed that he had already raised this issue, emphasising the need for careful risk management. He stated, I've been very open that I consider fiscal sustainability to be a significant risk that needs active mitigation now. He pointed to high inflation, pandemic-induced backlogs and a real terms fall in the capital block grant as key challenges. A spokesperson for the First Minister acknowledged the significant financial pressures, noting, the First Minister himself has said that in the Chamber, That's obviously been a reality for some time. We've had 14 years of austerity, that's the way it is. Obviously, inflation and other issues in the economy are causing problems. The announcement that the first fiscal event of Mr. Swinney's administration will take place on June 20, just over a week before the summer recess, raised concerns from committee convener Kenneth Gibson. He described the delay as not really acceptable from a scrutiny point of view, highlighting the difficulties it poses for effective parliamentary oversight. In her letter, the Finance Secretary assured that she would be available to appear before the committee the following week. Mr. Gibson, however, expressed concerns about the timing, stating, "It makes it extremely difficult for clerking teams to get papers out to members, let alone for members to absorb it to have any meaningful strategy in our last committee meeting on the Tuesday before recess." Mr. Swinney is expected to make a statement in Parliament this week outlining the direction of his government, which Mr. Marks indicated would influence the financial strategy. Stay tuned for more updates on Scotland's budget and financial strategy as we continue to follow this developing story. Women's Euro 2025 qualifier update. Scotland's Women's Euro 2025 qualifier match against Israel at Hemden Park on May the 31st will now be played behind closed doors. The Scottish Football Association made this decision after receiving updated intelligence and conducting extensive security consultations, which indicated potential disruption to the match. The SFA emphasised that they had no fixture without fans in Glasgow. Similarly, Scotland's away match against Israel on June the 4th in Budapest will also be held without spectators. This is the participation of Israel's national teams in UEFA competitions, despite the ongoing conflict in Gaza since October. Yes, assured them that measures are in place to provide automatic and full refunds to supporters who had purchased tickets for these matches. They apologised for any injuries caused by the decision, stressed that the safety of supporters, players, team staff and officials is important. Pedro's Los's Scotland side is for 2025, their first major women's tournament since the 2019 World Cup. Despite the challenges, remains focused on their goal of qualifying for the tournament. The team is in a group with Israel, Serbia and Slovakia. The decision to play without fans underscores the complexities of organising international sporting events amid global and regional security concerns. Controversial arts project funding. Culture Secretary Angus Robertson has demanded an urgent meeting with Creative Scotland following revelations that an arts project involving real sex scenes received over £100,000 in funding. Angus Robertson expressed his deep concern after documents obtained by BBC Scotland News revealed that the initial funding application clearly indicated the project would feature these sex scenes. Despite this, Creative Scotland claimed they were of explicit content when they asked support for the RAIN project in March. The project, directed by Leonie Ray Gasson, acknowledged in its application that development would involve a sex scene with genital contact involving 3 cast members. The project also planned for STI testing before rehearsals were necessary. Mr. Robertson has requested an urgent meeting with Creative Scotland's leadership to discuss how confidence in the organisation can be restored. Scotland had initially supported the project, securing more than £110,000 of lottery money, but later asked for £76,000 to be refunded. Creative Scotland defended their decision, stating they believed the project involved simulated performances, despite the explicit content described in the application. They released evidence of a casting call for dancers and sex workers, including those with disabilities, to participate in non-simulated sex scenes. The page was deleted after facing heavy criticism from politicians and feminist groups. Women's rights group For Women Scotland condemned the project, stating it dehumanised women and promoted unhealthy and dangerous relationships. Despite the backlash, Creative Scotland paid 90% of the second grant and managed to recover £67,000. The remaining £8,350 was spent mainly on subcontracted freelancers and was not claimed back to protect the precarious income of these workers. The project, set to premiere at the Take Me Somewhere Festival in Glasgow 2025, was to film non-simulated sex in the Scottish Highlands and display the footage on large screens. Supporting partners included Creative Scotland-funded arts charities Take Me Somewhere and The Workroom, which hosted development days for RAIN. In a letter to the Scottish Parliament Committee, Creative Scotland's Chief Executive, Ian Munro, praised Gasson's track record and the application's clear storytelling narrative and sexual themes. He noticed the project was aimed at a specific audience rather than the mainstream. Well, Scotland's national identity census results. New census data released today reveals significant shifts in how people in Scotland identify themselves nationally. The 2022 census shows that majority, 65.5% of the population, identify solely as Scottish, an increase from 62% in 2011. Conversely, the number of people themselves as both Scottish and British has dropped dramatically. In 2011, 18% of the population identified with nationalities, but by 2022 this number fell to just 8%. Meanwhile, those identifying only as British rose to 13% from 8.4% in 2011. The data also highlights gender differences in national identity. A higher percentage of females, 66%, reported their only national identity as Scottish, compared to males, 64.6%. In addition to national identity, the census provides insights into language skills. It shows that 2.5% of people aged 3 and over had some skill in Gaelic in 2022, an increase of from 1.7% in 2011. The highest concentration of Gaelic speakers is in Na Ilansar, Western Isles, with 57%, followed by Highland, 8%, and Bute, 6%. There's also a rise in those with skills in Scots, increasing to 46% in 2022 from 37% in 2011. Aberdeenshire had the highest percentage of Scots speakers at 64%, while Na Ilansar had the lowest at 30%. Director of Census Statistics John Roth Smith commented on the findings, stating, "These statistics give a fascinating insight into religion, ethnicity, national identity, and language across Scotland, and how they've changed over the years. This data will help local and central government, businesses and charities to plan services in the years ahead." The census data not only provides a snapshot of England's evolving identity, but also highlights the cultural diversity and linguistic skills within the nation. This information is crucial for planning and delivering services tailored to the needs of Scotland's communities. Water bill increases in England and Wales. Water companies in England and Wales are proposing significant increases in water bills over the next 5 years. According to the figures compiled by the Consumer Council for Water, these increases range from 24% to 91%. Southern Water is requesting the largest increase at 91%, while South Staffordshire and Cambridge Water are asking for the smallest increase at 24%. The proposed hikes aim to fund $100 billion in spending to replace aging leaking pipes and reduce sewage discharges. The proposals come ahead of a crucial meeting this week when industry regulator Ofwat will decide what companies can charge between 2025 and 2030. Water companies have faced heavy criticism for widespread leaks and sewage discharges, which critics attribute to underinvestment in the country's infrastructure. Fewer than 1 in 6 customers consider water bill rises affordable, according to a survey conducted by the companies themselves that's required. The regulator is unlikely to approve the full requested increases, but is expected to agree to at least half. There's obviously an issue with a lot of the money having been paid in dividends to shareholders and debt being leveraged. Many of these companies down in England and Wales, in England, have huge debts. Mike Keel, chief of CCW, said that the proposed bill increases are going to come as a massive surprise to people. He added, "People do want to see improvements and understand that takes investment, but the scale of what's being proposed is going to come as a shock." Southern Water, facing major infrastructure upgrades, explained that the increased funds are necessary to address water stress, reduce the use of storm overflows, and protect the environment. The company, owned by Australian firm Macquarie, has faced criticism for its management of Thames Water, including massively increasing the amount of debt that Thames Water is carrying. And there has been some speculation that Thames Water might go bust. Water UK, representing suppliers, acknowledged that bill rises are never welcome and emphasised the increase in financial support for customers who struggle to pay their bills. Ofwat is scrutinising these plans to ensure investments are necessary and offer value for money. The preliminary report on the approved bill rises will be published on the 12th. Water services in Northern Ireland and Scotland are publicly owned and not affected by these proposed increases. Stay tuned for further updates on this story. The French President's visit to New Caledonia. French President Emmanuel Macron is set to travel to New Caledonia on Tuesday, just over a week after riots erupted in the French overseas territory, resulting in 6 deaths of hundreds and hundreds of injuries. The unrest began last week when politicians in Paris voted on allowing French residents who've lived in New Caledonia for 10 years the right to vote in provincial elections. Some local leaders fear this change could dilute the voting power of the Kanaks, the indigenous group that makes up about 41% of the population and is a major force in the pro-independence movement. The riots have led to widespread looting and arson. Dozens of shops and businesses have been looted and burned, cars torched, and road barricades set up. A state of emergency and in place, with army reinforcements deployed to restore order. Speaking after a cabinet meeting, French government spokesman Christophe Thévenot announced Macron's visit to set up a mission without specifying details. Thévenot emphasized, "Our priority is the return to calm and order," noting that while the situation is improving, more work is needed. On Tuesday, Australia and New Zealand sent planes to evacuate some of the estimated 3,000 tourists in New Caledonia, as the main airport remains closed to commercial flights. Australia's Foreign Ministry, Penny Wong, confirmed clearance for evacuation flights, with the Royal Australian Air Force Hercules landing in Nurnes to assist. The plane can carry 124 passengers, and efforts are underway to facilitate more evacuation flights. Meanwhile, France's highest administrative court, the Conseil d'État, is reviewing complaints from rights groups and citizens over the unprecedented decision to shut down TikTok on the island. Believes the aim used to communicate and organise violent protests. The shutdown, effective since May 15, has sparked legal challenges and criticism from civil liberties advocates. TikTok called the decision regrettable, stating it had been taken without any request from local authorities or the French government to remove content. Rights groups like the Ligue des Droits de l'Homme and La Quadrature du Net have filed a fast-track case to overturn the ban, warning it sets a dangerous precedent for freedom of expression. La Quadrature du Net said the French government, in shutting down access to TikTok, has struck an unprecedented and particularly serious blow to freedom of expression online. The group argued that neither the local context nor the platform's content justify such a shutdown by a regime claiming to abide by the rule of law. Jacques Toubon, a former French citizens' rights ombudsman, expressed his shock on French television, saying, "It's the first time that France has stopped a social network. There are many networks, and if you ban one, people will go elsewhere." He stressed the need for a balance between civil liberties and security, likening the shutdown to stopping newspapers from being printed in the early 20th century. Arnaud Lehner, an expert from cybersecurity firm F5, noted that while state blocking of platforms is common in places like China and the Middle East, it has limits and can be circumvented with VPNs. Since the ban, VPN usage in New Caledonia has reportedly increased by 150%. As the unrest continues, the international community watches closely. The evacuation of tourists remains a priority, with more flights being planned. Maxwell Winchester, an Australian tourist barricaded in a resort, told AFP, "We are ecstatic. Every night we had to sleep with one eye open. Every noise we were worried they were coming to loot us." Turbulence incident on London-Singapore flight. A 73-year-old British man has died from a suspected heart attack. More than were injured when a London-Singapore flight experienced severe turbulence. The incident occurred during meal service, causing a sudden drop that left passengers and crew members in chaos. Briton Andrew Davis described awful screaming and a thud as the turbulence hit. "Objects were flying through the air. I was covered in coffee. It was incredibly severe," he told BBC Radio 5 Live. Another passenger, Safran Azmir, a 28-year-old student, recounted how the aircraft tilted up and then in shock. He fell before a dramatic drop launched everyone not wearing seatbelts into the ceiling. "Some people hit their heads on the baggage cabins, denting them," he added. The Singapore-bound Boeing 77 was diverted to Bangkok, making an emergency landing at 3:45 local time. The flight carried 211 passengers and 18 crew. Singapore Airlines expressed deep condolences to the family of the deceased and stated that 31 people were taken to hospital. In a statement, the airline issued the remaining passengers are being examined and treated at Suvarnabhumi International Airport in Bangkok. The airline is coordinating with Thai authorities to provide medical assistance and is leading a team to offer additional support. Alison Barker received a message from her son Josh, who was on the flight. The plane is making an emergency landing. I love you all, he wrote. Josh later described how he blacked out and found himself on the floor, suffering minor injuries. Jerry, 68, drove Australia for his son's wedding, said there was no warning before the plane plunged. He and his wife hit their heads on the ceiling and other passengers were thrown around the cabin. A British man with a neck injury speaking from a Thai hospital said, "We were lucky, none of us died." He described how his son was thrown 2 rows back and another passenger hit the roof in the toilet. The authorities dispatched ambulances and emergency teams to Suvarnabhumi Airport. Singapore's Transport Minister, Chee Hong Tat, assured assistance to the passengers and their families. Aviation expert John Strickland noted that injuries from severe turbulence are rare but can be dramatic. He emphasized the importance of keeping seatbelts loosely fastened throughout the flight. Research indicates that climate change may increase the likelihood of severe turbulence in the future. Community action to reach net zero. The Scottish Government has announced £5.5 million for Scotland's climate action hubs. Communities will receive a share of up to £5 million Scottish Government funding to help reduce their emissions and improve resilience in the face of climate change. The funding for 2024-25 will support Scotland's network of 20 community climate action hubs, which encourage and support climate change. Based across Scotland, the hubs have supported a range of projects bespoke to their area, including on local energy generation and flood mitigation. Cabinet Secretary for Net Zero and Energy, Mary McCallan, confirmed the funding during a visit to the North East Scotland Climate Action Network hub in Aberdeen. One of the original 2 hubs that successfully piloted the concept in 2021, the Nescan hub has delivered climate assemblies to schools, climate literacy sessions to the local community, supported repair cafes to increase local reuse and recycling rates, and provided advice and support around tackling fuel poverty by improving energy efficiency for buildings as well as renewable heat and energy generation. Ms McCallan said, "I'm very pleased to hear firsthand how Nescan Hub's work has been helping communities in Aberdeen to support climate action through projects tailored to meet the needs and interests of the area. Tackling climate change is our collective responsibility and will require collaborative action at all levels. We must also share in the benefits that our net zero journey will bring. Communities are uniquely placed to play a critical role in shaping and driving forward the transition to low carbon and climate resilient living. And we want to empower people to take action in their neighbourhoods that's right for them. This is why we're proud to continue to support our hugely successful framework of regional climate hubs, which provide a vehicle for communities to come together and engage in collective grassroots action." Nescan Hub Manager Alison Stewart said, "We're proud of the continuing achievements of groups supported by the Nescam Hub, in particular the ongoing work to help fulfil the residents' wishes to create a healthier, happier and more sustainable community. This will not only support our climate crisis, but also improve well-being, help address fuel poverty and increase community capacity, assets and wealth building." Well, that's it for this evening. Before I go, I just want to remind you that at Broadcasting Scotland we depend on the generosity of our supporters. Our programmes will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. To everyone who's donated and to everyone who's signed up to make a regular pledge, thank you very much. Our focus must now move to securing the future of independent broadcasting for Scotland by growing our subscriber base and regular funding. Before we go, the National Theatre of Scotland has announced that it will present a programme of 3 shows at the Edinburgh Festivals in 2024, including 2 world premieres. David Ireland's new play, The Fifth Step, directed by Findarn Hertog, Jane Carter Cash, The Woman in Me, a new play written and performed by Charlene Boyd and directed by Cora Bissett, and a return of Gary McNair and Joe Douglas's Dear Billy. We interviewed Gary McNair and Joe Douglas last year, and here's a wee reminder of that interview. Thank you.
Is that not incredible? You're out here today talking to people about Billy Connolly, and here's me, only his biggest fan? That's unbelievable. And I do quite a good him as well. I do. Oh, listen, I do. No, I know you're saying just go on, wait and do it then. Okay, fair enough, right? But I'm a bit nervous now, because I've talked myself up and you're expecting it to be dead good.
I'm Gary McNair. I'm the writer and one of the performers of Dear Billy.
So, Dear Billy is a really original and unique idea for a stage production. How did this first sort of come together?
Well, loads of people had said over years, either coming to shows or different theatres or whatever, saying, do you do something about Billy Connolly? And I said, great, that's brilliant, but what? And it always, so it's been in the back of my head for ages to do something. But they're off big banana shoes to fill, you know, and also his biographies are so great. What would you do? You tell his life story or, you know, say, hello, I'm Billy Connolly, this is the story of, you know, it didn't feel like the right thing, it never landed. And then, but the more I spoke to people about the fact that I was thinking about something about Billy Connolly, they would all say, oh, I've got a Billy story, you know, and you realise everyone's got a Billy story, and they were all giving them to me. And I realised I need to do something with them. And then you realise you could sort of piece together who he is and what he means through all these contributions, and then sort of find out a bit about ourselves as well along the way. So that was when it really sort of came together, and it's been a real team, huge team effort, collecting those stories, loads of amazing story collectors, going out and speaking to people on the street, working with the director Joe to sort of try and, you know, pick from these. We'd love to have them all for you, you know, because they're all so wonderful and beautiful.
It's not a tribute show, you know, but it's the idea for kind of going out and collecting stories and asking people, and then folding that back into a script which Gary writes, came from that from that, I think, that desire to kind of make a show about Billy and kind of that in a way that he might enjoy watching himself.
And I've done previous shows where you walk up to people and say, can I just talk to you? I've not got time. And I must admit I'm the same. With Billy, they give you the usual attempted body swerve. No, I don't. I've not got time. It's about Billy Connolly. Oh, right. Well, I've got time for him. I've got time for Billy.
So the show has an amazing collection of all these different stories from Billy's, you know, legendary career. Do you have a personal favourite, one that resonated with you?
Yeah, I think there's some brilliant ones. There's people who kind of, you know, do Connolly do their best joke or their favourite bit of patter or whatever, which make me laugh and kind of connect me to it. But I think, what's my favourite? There's a guy who just goes on this really beautiful, again, kind of slightly distracted. I think he might have smoked something, to be honest, because he just goes off on a complete tangent. But it's just really eloquent and really beautiful and very funny. And it's that kind of way in which, capturing the way in which people speak, which often you don't see on a stage. You don't see, you know, it's that kind of tradition. I think Scotland's particularly good at that sense of capturing the voice and putting it and kind of elevating it in their art, from kind of, you know, whether it's in the poetry or the prose, and Billy absolutely is part of that. And I think that's what we're trying to do, is kind of capture those moments which can kind of, and put them on a stage and you see them in a slightly different light.
My favourites are in the show, but also a lot of my favourites aren't, because you try and build a show as well. So you can't just go this bit, that bit, all our favourites. You have to try and craft a piece, you know. So there's points where you say, oh, there's no room for this one, which we love. But maybe there's an extended version, maybe there's an archive at some point to be had. But it's they all mean a lot, because everyone's given something of themselves to do it, so they're all as special as each other, which is lovely.
Finally, if there's one thing that you really hope people take away from the show after watching it, what would that be?
I just want to have a great time and have a really, really good night. And me and Gary talked about like wanting them to just go up the road and go and look at the favourite bits of Billy and dig out the old DVDs or the records or and yeah, maybe kind of getting. I'm really pleased that we're able to sort of explore the kind of some of the music a bit, and that look at that era of kind of Scottish folk musicians that Billy was part of, because it had some extraordinary artists in there as well.
We want them to feel good, you know. We want them to, I imagine, we want them to have laughed. We want them to have felt emotional. The music in the show is tremendous. Jill O'Sullivan and Simon Liddell, they make some beautiful music and actually elevates Billy's stuff. People think back on Billy, you can't really pin. I mean, obviously we remember him as a comedian, but as a musician, as a storyteller, as a communicator, as a leader of people, really, you know. And their music really takes us, I think, to a beautiful and emotional space, which I think will carry through. My hope is that when people get home, they'll want to tell people their Billy story, and then they'll want to watch Billy on YouTube and keep going. So, yeah, we just hope they have a good old time at the theatre.